Hello, and thanks so much for joining us all today for today's webinar. I'm Dr. Wendy Smeltzer. I'm the National Medical Director for our Wello telemedicine platform and Medical Director for our InLive clinic in Calgary. So last week we focused more on the medical and business side of this current COVID pandemic, and today we want to really focus on the mental health impact of this. So since we met last week, the pandemic continues to escalate. Most countries in the world are now affected, and in Canada our numbers continue to increase. We now have all provinces and 2 territories with growing numbers of confirmed cases, and increasing public health measures have been put in place to control this outbreak. So with this evolution also comes stress, anxiety, depression, and general fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of illness for ourselves and for our loved ones, and the mental health issues that can arrive just from being in isolation. So I'm really pleased today to introduce our psychologist, Karin Klassen, to talk about the mental health impact of this pandemic and some of the practical tips and advice we can follow on coping with COVID. So Karin Klassen is a registered psychologist. She specializes in the treatment of stress in all of its forms, from life transitions, mood and personality disorders, addictions and chronic pain, to whatever other emotional dysregulations erupts in the course of our lifespan. And this certainly is a big disruption and eruption. So I'd like to turn it over to you, Karin, and we look forward to hearing your advice.
Thank you very much, Wendy. So today I'm going to talk about a couple of things. Overall, I'm going to talk about managing your isolation and your mental health. Isolation in your brain, what goes on in your brain when we go into some fight or flight response. I'm going to give you a specific skill called SUDS, or subjective units of distress, which is a way to do an ongoing measurement of your physical self and where your stress level is at, and then also go to some really hard and fast tips that you can use to structure your day so that you get through this period with as sanely as possible. First thing I want to talk about is that people will automatically kind of divide into 2 different categories, and this is just something that happens by birth. It's our nature. It's based on size of amygdala, but basically some of us will be sensitive and some of us will be less sensitive than other people, and that's just what we get through birth. People who are sensitive might feel things at a 12 out of 10 that other people feel at a 3 out of 10. So it's almost like if you're a sensitive person and we know who we are, we might work in a helping profession, we might be creative, we're empathetic, people come to us. So sensitive people can almost wick emotional energy from the people around them, and we have to be careful because we can almost get anxiety by osmosis. So it's kind of important to recognize, if we're a sensitive person, that we may be not only dealing with our own anxiety but also with the people around us, because we're going to wick their emotional energy anyway, and also people are going to come to us and they're going to ask us things and they're going to vent, and a lot of those things are going to pile up. So it's kind of important to recognize, okay, I'm a sensitive person, and so I actually need to put in some boundaries, and I might actually need to protect myself a little bit if I'm starting to feel overwhelmed. Some people are really structured people, and I usually joke that these are engineers, but it can be anybody. It can be a really structured person, and those people really get their coping and resiliency through going to work, having a really structured day, having a really structured environment. And so now those people thrown into an environment where now you're at home, it's a bit of a free-for-all, your structure is gone, you can't fix things, you can't control it, and that may increase your anxiety. So it's important to kind of recognize that we might be a different kind of person, but we will be feeling fight or flight, or we could be going into an anxiety response, just even based on the kind of person that we are. What is fight or flight? So fight or flight is your brain's natural response. It's a protective device to put you into some sort of, it's your brain's natural response to protect you. So if it senses vulnerabilities, your brain will go into a fight or flight response, which means that all your sensory perceptions are heightened and your body is filled with adrenaline and cortisol. And adrenaline is like high octane jet fuel for your body, and cortisol is unmetabolized sugar. It was that part of our brain, that fight or flight response, is designed to physically protect our bodies so that we can outrun the buffalo, so that we can lift the car off the baby. It wasn't designed to deal with emotional issues like anxiety or fear, but it does because that's the only mechanism we have in our brain. We all have kind of two people in our brain. We have this prefrontal cortex that's really logical and smart. There's no feeling that happens up here. This is our working memory, our processing memory. All of our smart stuff kind of happens up here. And then we have this kind of thug that really isn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, but this is the gatekeeper of all the sensory information that comes into our brain. It's the very first place all the information comes in. That part of our brain decides, am I safe? And if it gets a whiff of anything, it throws us into fight or flight. And so that's what you're feeling in your body. Most of us know when we're in fight or flight because we feel this heart palpitating, or we might get blotches, or we feel warm, or our palms are sweaty. Probably a little bit like me right now talking to all of you, just because who likes to public speak. But we know when we feel like we're in fight or flight. But actually fight or flight starts a lot earlier than that. We just have coping and resiliency skills that cover a lot of it until it suddenly becomes overwhelming and becomes too much to manage. So if you think of 10 as meltdown, 5 as neutral, and 0 as joy, if 5 is neutral, we're in fight or flight at 6, but we might not actually feel it until we're kind of 8 or 9 because we have coping and resiliency skills, and suddenly they ran out and we go, I'm in fight or flight, I went from 0 to 100. We actually don't, but that's what's going on with our fight or flight response. Your body's fight or flight response might actually present to you in lots of different ways. It might present in terms of the traditional type of anxiety. It might present to you in terms of pain. We actually think of chronic pain now as, by and large, an emotional response. All of those things look identical in the brain, and we have a lot of this information because we have fMRI data, so we can see the brain think in ways that we couldn't before. We can actually see the brain think like it's a TV show, like it's a plot. You can see the sensory information, then it goes to this part of the brain goes, do I have experience in this before? Have I seen this before? Then it fires out a signal to another part of the brain after it decides how it's going to interpret that sensory perception. Chemicals are released in our body that support that, and then we have a behavioral export. So we can kind of see in the brain everything that's going on, and that fight or flight response is, once it's ignited, we know that there's going to be a behavioral export, some sort of urge that our brain is going to deliver us so that we can get back into the zone. So if I'm feeling fight or flight, if it's rising up into me and I can feel it, I might snap at my partner or my kids. I might hurl a frying pan. I might drink a bottle of wine. I might eat a bunch of chips or a couple of Big Macs. My brain wants me to self-soothe as fast as possible so I get back into a regular zone. So it's going to deliver me all sorts of urges to do things to purge that excess of adrenaline and cortisol. And so that's what an urge is. It's it doesn't come from nowhere. It's your brain delivering you this impulse to do a behavior so that you get yourself back into that zone. And once we know that, then we can kind of go, okay, well, I can give in to the instant gratification urge, or I can actually intervene, calm myself, and do something more positive instead. That part of your brain, that fight or flight response, it cares about instant gratification because it just cares about your body. It doesn't care if you're happy, sad, glad, if that makes sense. It just cares how soon can I get this body back into the zone that's homeostasis. This is where my body likes to run. And so it will do anything it can to get you back into that zone. So if it feels you're distressed and it thinks that, you know what, I can give this person an urge to eat or swat my baby on the bum or yell at my partner, then my urge is purged. I might feel bad later, but in the short term, I actually feel calm. That's a fight or flight response. So we can do a couple of things. Knowing that that's what an urge is, we can use this as an opportunity to create new neural pathways. So we have our brain's our belief system about ourselves is a bunch of neural pathways that have been either programmed into us when we were growing up. This is the person who I am. This is the belief system I have about myself. These are the experiences I've had in my life. If we feel discomfort, we're in a situation that now feels uncomfortable, we don't like it, it's because we have no neural pathway for it. Our brain is going, this is not the way we like to do things. This is outside of our realm of experience. And this is an opportunity for you to actually create a new neural pathway and decide how you're going to get through that. So as much as it seems like it might be a panicky response, you are actually able to intervene and go, okay, I know what my brain is doing here. I know what it's trying to do, but I can actually create a new neural pathway. We can't create new neurons. We're born with however many neurons we have, and they start to die as soon as we're born. But we have an infinite capacity to create new neural pathways. That's neuroplasticity. I couldn't speak French. I learned to speak French. Now I have neural pathways to speak French. This is an unknown situation that we're all kind of facing. So it is really an opportunity for us to go, okay, you know what? I can actually create some coping and resiliency skills and get through this in a positive way. One way to do this is to start to think about, well, wait a second, what are my values? What kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to be somebody who gives in to urges, or is this an opportunity for me to strengthen myself and to actually move into a positive direction? And you can do this through little micro movements where instead of intervening when your stress is 9 out of 10, you kind of go, okay, I'm feeling this bit of stress right here at 6 out of 10. I'm going to intervene to do something here to bring it down so that I actually am moving in the right direction. I'm moving forward instead of moving backwards. Because what happens is when we give into those urges often, if we hurl the frying pan across the room, if we snap at our kids, then we feel bad later, because when that primal part of our brain takes over, it can actually shut off access to that prefrontal cortex. You can see that in an fMRI. This part of the brain totally fills with blood flow, and this part of the brain quite depletes. And so we're really not in our right mind when that primitive brain takes over. And so anything that we can do to intervene before we sort of lose complete access to our prefrontal cortex is what we kind of want to do. And micro movements move us in that direction. Any small step in the right direction can decrease our stress so that we don't get to the point where we're 9 out of 10. Another thing I wanted to talk about is that kids will completely reflect your behavior. So first of all, they're mini you, so they're 50% you, and the rest of the other 50% that's an influence on them is your environment that they're growing up in with you. So how you deal with stress, how you deal with what's going on, how you feel is how they're going to feel. They're going to reflect from you your level of distress. So how you manage yourself, is a huge teaching moment, not only for yourself, but also for your kids. They're going to see you, they're going to mimic your behavior. So you'll have heard of fake it till you make it. In a way that kind of works. If I force my body to do something, even though that's not where my brain is, my brain will actually join me. So if I take some, even if I'm feeling panicked, if I take some deep breaths and kind of relax myself, I start to speak in a slower voice. I lower the sound of my voice, the tenor of my voice, then what happens is my body actually relaxes. If I fake it, even if I don't feel it, eventually my brain will join me. We think our brain goes somewhere and we think we have to follow it, but really we don't. Our brain is kind of like, it's a blob of neural pathways, which is how we've always done things before, but we can choose to do something differently. Our brain is kind of like the Wizard of Oz up there. The thing with the heft is my body. If I do something different with my body, my brain will actually join me, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So when you're reflecting your behavior to your kids, you want to reflect kind of how you want them to be, how you want to be. Be honest though, and say, you know what, I'm feeling a little bit of distress. You know what I think I'm going to do? I think I'm going to do some deep breathing so I can bring it down. Let the kids do this with you. Let them know that you're feeling some stress, but you're actually going to intervene and you're going to use a skill to bring it down. I'm going to go drink a cold glass of water. You know what I think I'm going to do? I'm going to have a cup of tea. Why don't you have a hot chocolate with me, and let's sit down and do some deep breathing. Let's talk about some happy things. Let's think about what we can anticipate for a fun thing we can do today. So you can let them in on the fact that you have some anxiety, and that but you're going to model behavior that's calming, so that they will reflect that. One of the tools that I find most helpful with my clients is something called a SUD scale, and that's subjective units of distress. If you look up SUDs online, there will be a million different versions of these. Most psychologists have some SUD scale they use or another. I like this one because it has happiness as well as things that are stressful. So just as I said earlier, if you consider 10 meltdown, 5 is neutral, and 0 is joy, then when you're 6, you're actually in fight or flight. Fight or flight it doesn't come out in levels. So our brain isn't smart enough. That primitive part of our brain isn't smart enough to go, oh, this situation has happened. That's about a 2 out of 10 on the fight or flight scale, or that's about a 6, or that's about a 7. It just goes into fight or flight. It's called gate theory. It opens up the gate and we're in fight or flight. So even though we don't notice it till 8, we're actually in fight or flight at 6. It's way easier to intervene with a skill at 6 than it is at 9. At 9, it's kind of like the emotional train has left the station and it's got to hit a wall before it stops. That's when we're going to have a meltdown. But if I notice that something's creeping up at 6, I can actually do something to intervene so that I can bring it down. Because at 5 and 6, I know that I have access to my prefrontal cortex. Once I get up there to 8 or 9, I know that I'm probably in trouble and I'm probably going to have a bit of a meltdown if I don't do something to intervene. So I really like the SUD scale. It's something that works really well with children. You can bring it in with your family and actually use it as its own language. So I had a couple of boys that I raised, and I used the SUD scale with them. Even now they're adult, they're at university, and I can call them and I can say, what's going on? And they'll say nothing. And I'll say, what about those grades? Nothing. What about that girl dating? Nothing. They're not going to tell me anything. But if I say, what's your SUDs? Because they've grown up with this, and they say 7, well, 7 I know is maybe they had a poor exam mark or they have a hangover. By 9, I'm going to be concerned and I'm going to say, okay, you know what? Maybe it's time for you to come home, or maybe I've got some points, maybe it's time for me to fly out there. So SUDS becomes its own language. When we're in 8 or 9, in terms of our emotional distress, we're not that articulate because we don't have access to that prefrontal cortex. So recognizing what's going on in your body is really important. If somebody says to me at 9 and I'm crying or I'm upset and somebody says to me, what's wrong? I don't know. I don't know what's wrong because really I don't have access to that prefrontal cortex. So you want to kind of intervene as much as possible. Sometimes families create actually a barometer, a felt barometer that they put up on the wall, and they kind of go, okay, well, what does 6 feel like? 6 feels like a little flash of irritation in my stomach. By 7, I might be snapping at somebody. By 8, I might be argumentative. And by 9, I might be actually picking fights. By 10, maybe that's where I'm saying things I don't mean or slamming doors or yelling. When if I can intervene earlier, I can hopefully defeat those things. It's just as important also, though, to know the things that bring you joy. So the things that 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, those are the things that make you happy. Playing with the dog, going for a walk, having a cup of tea, having a bath, looking at photos from holidays, all of those things that can bring it down. And it's kind of important. You could sit down even as a family and kind of go, okay, what are our SUDs? What are the things that make us happy? If we're at 8, then there's no point even really having a conversation about what's upsetting us. Let's do something that brings us joy, that lowers our SUDs, so that we can actually have a conversation when we're a little bit calmer. This is a really common scale that you can use in families or between couples or even as an individual to kind of know. If I am feeling 6 or 7 and I cut in with a positive skill, I'm way more likely to be able to manage my behavior. Other tips for getting through this period of time. I call this next slide, what is Martin Scorsese doing in my head and how do I get rid of him? We have filmmakers in our head making movies about things that aren't true. These are things that aren't happening in the here and now. They're things that our imagination is making up. All the what if stuff. It can be all the what if this happens, what if that happens, what if that happens. None of that stuff is actually true. That's actually our fight or flight response, giving us a bunch of negative thoughts so that we can accommodate that and protect ourselves. However, it's not really helpful because it actually throws us into fight or flight. And I don't know about you, but the last thing I need when I'm having an emotional response or worrying about something is to have my body fill with adrenaline and cortisol, and now I'm just hyped up even more. So staying out of your head, recognizing when are my thoughts running away with me versus when am I in the moment. I want to be in the moment because your thoughts are not facts. Feelings are not facts. That's just your brain's fight or flight response trying to warn you about things that could happen. If you think about the caveman, The one that sat there and went, okay, I've got my fire going, I got my buffalo here, my loincloth, my club, life is good, now I'm gonna just enjoy the sunlight. That's the caveman that got eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. The caveman that went, okay, I got my loincloth, I got my buffalo, I've got my spear, everything's ready. What if this happens? What if this happens? What if this happens? That's the one that survives. And that's what our brains are developed to do, to develop worries so that we pay attention to all the things that could happen. It's an outdated response. That fight or flight response hasn't changed anatomically. It's identical to when we were cavemen, has not changed in 5,000 years, and it responds to emotional issues as if they're life or death when they're not. So when we know that, then we can try to stay out of our head. My body is going to respond to things I'm worried about as if they're actually happening. We could sit here and talk about all the things we're worried about and measure our bio and neurofeedback and see that we're going into fight or flight, even though right now I'm safe. None of those things has happened. Everything is okay right now. So you really want to stay out of your head and stay in the moment. And that's called mindfulness. If you've never practiced mindfulness, this is maybe a good time to start. Mindfulness is this crazy superpower of being able to recognize, when am I drifting up here and how can I get back into the moment? There's lots of good ways to get to be mindful. One is to just check the facts. Is it true, or am I feeling that way? Because if I'm feeling that way, I can just let it go. Imagine it just drifting away like leaves in a river or clouds in a sky. You don't have to hang on to negative thoughts. It's called diffusion. You can just let them pass. Your brain's always going to deliver them to you. A brain at rest will always default to negative thinking patterns, but it's really, you can choose not to wear those feelings and to just let them pass on by. I think of mindfulness and meditation as two different ends of a continuum. Meditation, I feel like, is going into my head and finding some peace. That probably is going to take me a little longer to do. That requires stillness, being in a room by myself. That might not be practical in the current environment, but I can be mindful 20 times a day. I can always get out of my head. If my thoughts are starting to race, I can always get out of my head and be right here in the moment. Sometimes people say to me, well, when I'm up in my head, that's when I'm processing. But I'm going to tell you that because we can do these fMRIs, we can see that we're not processing. When we're just ruminating, it's just in an in box. It turns around in our brain, and we actually aren't processing it. We process things when we're planful about it. So if you have worries, write them down on a piece of paper, and then write down what you're going to do about it, and then leave it alone, so that you don't have to keep going back. Using your senses is a real trick to being mindful. I can use my sensory perceptions at any time to bring myself out of my head and into the moment with virtually no training. My sensory perceptions, I have 5 of them, sight, smell, taste, touch, feel, can only be in the moment. So if I am paying attention to my sensory perception, if I'm going, this glass is cold, I can feel the ridges on it, I can feel the weight of the water. If I'm doing that in the moment, I can't be both with my sensory perception and in my head going, I can't believe this, am I going to lose my job? What will happen to my house? Will I lose my house? So using my sensory perceptions is a way to that I can always get in the moment. And I can do this 20 times a day just to get out of my head, get into the moment. There's some really good free resources for learning mindfulness, and honestly, this is a superpower. You'll use this for the rest of your life. It's kind of a good time. There's mindfulness for kids. There's some really good resources, and I do have a slide at the end that has some good free resources that you can access if you want to learn some mindfulness skills. Again, something that you can easily do with kids. What are we tasting? What are we feeling? What are we smelling? Those are the things that get you right into the moment. There's an interesting thing that somebody said to me once that I just find really compelling. If I'm in my head 30% of the day, then I'm only here 70% of the time. And if I'm only here 70% of the time, I'm living 70% of my life. And I want to live 100% of my life. This is la la land, make-up land up here. This isn't true. This is where I want to be. I want to be 100% here. So mindfulness is a good way to do that. Another thing that you can do is just do something. If you're giving your brain something to do, then it will abandon emotional things and it will attend to physical things first, always. I have a client who comes in and she sobs so much during the session that I can't understand a word she's saying. And then she has to leave and write a check for $250. So now she really has something to cry about. We do the whole session standing in tree pose. Well, now her hypothalamus is up there trying to keep her balanced and keeping us both upright. It's not going to let her fall to the floor so she can keep crying. So she's standing upright and we're able to have a conversation. Doing something is a way to distract your brain. if you think about it, when you start ruminating is when you're sitting there doing nothing. When you're not giving your brain anything to do. That's 3 in the morning, we wake up, then our brain starts to go to negative thoughts. We're sitting on the couch, we're not doing anything, negative thoughts. Giving your brain something to do is a way to distract, even if it's not even an intellectual thing. I'm just going to do something with my body. Moving my body gives my brain a distraction. Let's see here, what else can I talk about? Reframing the experience. We can sit here and say, this is horrible, it's going to be a terrible time, I might lose my job, that all this stuff is going to happen, this is, you know, the apocalypse is coming around the corner. If we say those things, our brain will go, okay, it must be true. When we say things out loud, our brain believes they're true. When we write things down, our brain believes they're true. Using positive self-talk is a way to reframe the experience. Okay, this is sabbatical me. This is a time that we can regroup, look at our life worth living goals, make some adjustments if we need to make some adjustments, hunker down, be with family. The things that you say, your brain will tend to live up or down to whatever you say about the experience. So if you're going to frame the experience as a negative one, then your brain is going to join you and it's going to fill you with a bunch of negative chemicals so that it supports the negative experience. Positive self-talk is a really good way, both for yourself and for the people around you, to reframe the experience. And this is one of those things that you can wear and try it out and see. How do you feel after you go, okay, we got through another day. Good job, me. We got 5 things done today. Yay! How different do you feel than when you go, oh God, another crappy day. I didn't get anything done. You know, how different does your body feel afterwards? You can use body language. You can use verbal language to try to reframe the experience and keep it an upbeat one instead, as much as possible, instead of a negative experience. Take advantage of the time. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's free online now. There's free concerts, free cooking classes, free exercise classes. If you have a library card, you can access all the Rosetta Stone language MP3s. Online, you can do music lessons in every instrument, including voice. You can do virtual visits of museums and galleries. Make these things an event for your family or for yourself so that you're actually hyping it up and telling yourself, this is going to be really cool. I'm going to go to the Louvre today. I'm going to make myself a cup of chai tea, and I'm going to go to a museum in India, and I'm going to look at that art. You try to make things as celebratory and special as possible as you can within that environment. You also want to create as much structure as you can in your day. Get your feet on the floor at the same time every day. Make your bed so you've actually done something productive. You want to give yourself a list of 5 things that you could do in the day, and make sure that they're things that you could do, as small as they are, so that you can later cross them off and kind of go, okay, I've done that thing, I've done that thing, I've done that thing. Stress is a process, so you want to keep in mind that your brain changes every day, and that you may feel differently tomorrow than you feel today. You want to really understand that your brain changes with every day that passes, every interaction that passes, and that you may get new feelings tomorrow that you didn't have yesterday. Just let it happen. Pay attention to your body, listen to your body. That also includes paying attention to your visceral responses. Sometimes when something stressful like this happens, it's like we have a jar for a certain lifetime of trauma and stress. And something can sort of be the straw that breaks the camel's back, can tip over the jar, all this stuff comes out, and sometimes the stuff that comes out to the fore isn't the stuff that just happened, but might be something that happened when you were 5, 10, 15, 20. These things come out when we have time to deal with them, and sometimes when we have something traumatic is going on or something stressful is going on, all these other things can come out. So you want to pay attention to your body and pay attention to those visceral things, because those are clues. That's information about yourself that you can actually get to know yourself better. And finally, the last tip I'm going to say, and then we'll open it up for questions, is that you want to be aware of addictive behavior slipping in. When we lose structure, sometimes what can happen is we can kind of go, oh, it's 3 o'clock, it's cocktail hour somewhere, I can open my bottle of wine a little bit earlier tonight. or oh, the kids are much easier when they're playing internet games, I'm just going to let them go. Those kinds of behaviors can become addictive really quickly, and we want to be careful about those things slipping in. You know the things that are good for you and the things that aren't good for you. In particular, like internet addiction or gaming addiction for kids is really difficult to break, and because it uses the same thing that happens when you have gambling, it's a variable response ratio. They don't know what's going to happen next, so they keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. It becomes really addictive, and it's very difficult to break later. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention and using good principles that support your values when you structure out your day. And even though it might seem like short-term pain to stick to things like, okay, kids, only 1 hour of gaming today or 2 hours of gaming and then we're done, you want to stick to that, because otherwise you might cause yourself some longer-term things. So use things that are sort of micro movements in the right direction. Ask yourself, does this move me forward or backwards? And if it moves you backwards, then you kind of know, yeah, you know what, this is not the thing to do. I'm gonna do the thing that moves me in the right direction. And at this point, I've just sent out a whole bunch of stuff, and we'll open it for questions.
Well, thanks, Karin. We have a number of questions that have come in. So I'm going to start, and most of them are towards mental health. There are a few medical questions, and I'm very happy to answer some of those as well. So we'll throw a few of those in there also. So first question, Karin, what is the best way to stay informed but reduce panic? There's so much information and news programs, internet. So how do we be informed but not get stressed?
So you want to turn off the constant feed from 24-hour news and have the radio on all day. You want to turn that off. Pick your trusted sources and go to those. Personally, I go to the InLive email, I get the updates, I go to the government website, I go to the Alberta government website, and those are the things that I use as my guidelines. It's kind of need to know basis. We don't need to know every 5 minutes how many more people have been infected, how many more people have been infected. All I need to know is what behavior do I do that's responsible, that's healthy. That's what I'm going to stick to. The rest of the stuff, guess what, just fires me back up into my imagination. So pick the sources that you're going to use, structure times that you're going to use it. I check it morning, I check in at noon, and I check in the evening, and that's it. I'm not going to check in anywhere close to bedtime because I'm just going to start ruminating about that. Pick your sources, stick to those, don't let it run in the background, and also don't underestimate how much kids are absorbing when they hear that constantly going on. And don't forget, their little neural pathways are forming around this experience. So it can be a fearful one for them, or you can reassure them. It can be reassuring, and part of that means limiting your exposure to constant things. Also, you know, social media has been really good. You can look for positive things on social media. Things that are negative, ignore them, move on, move on, move on. Focus on the positive things, the way communities are being brought together, the things that are funny, and don't delve into all of the stuff that's negative. Just trust your specific resources and go there.
Thank you. So what would you say is the most critical difference between managing mental health under normal circumstances and managing mental health today? We know mental health is certainly a big issue, and many people do struggle even before this pandemic. So what's the difference now?
I think the difference now is that this can trigger all sorts of other things. So that part of the brain, that fight or flight response, isn't that sophisticated where it says, okay, this is about this issue, other stress we have in our life is about this or about this or about this. What happens when we get triggers is all of those things sort of blend together in a big pool. So I think what you might be feeling right now in terms of anxiety may not just be about what's going on in the moment. Pay attention to the fact that a whole bunch of other things may be blending in together and into this one big thing, and you may be focusing on this thing in the moment, but it may not just be this thing. Parse this thing off, deal with it separately, know you're getting the facts, know you're doing the things that are right, and then put it on an ice floe and let it go.
Excellent. So this feeling of isolation, so many people now are self-isolated, and I have a comment here that the feeling of self-isolation is stronger than we all thought. Many people have never entered that situation. So what would be tips for dealing with that sense of isolation, loneliness, etc.?
Well, it's interesting because that is information about yourself. This is an opportunity to kind of know yourself better. We really know ourselves only relative to other people. It's like we're sending off sonar all the time, and then based on the response of other people, it comes back to us, and that tells us the shape of us, metaphorically. And so when we lose that, it's kind of like, okay, well, wait a second, I don't know what that means anymore. So in a way, your feelings are information about yourself. You could be recording all of that stuff, because it's really, you might want to look back at it later, but also to avoid that isolation, you want to be using some really smart things like Zoom, or use phone people instead of texting, so that you can increase contact as much as possible. I had a dinner party with my kids. I got one set in Halifax, I got one set in Montreal, and we had a dinner party. I had an iPad up on one end of the table, and I had a laptop up on the other end of the table, and we Zoomed our dinner party. You can use those things to actually interact with people. And although it seems weird at first, within about 5 minutes, you're reading the person's body language, you can see their movements, you see the expressions on their faces, and you're able to kind of respond as if they're actually there as much as possible. So increase those activities, stay away from texting, which can increase social isolation, and actually see if you can do some things that are a little more interactive.
Great, thank you. A couple of medical questions that have come through that I'm happy to answer. One is it safe to work in an office building where another company that shares that building had an employee test positive for COVID? So one thing to be aware is that this situation is evolving, and through time we're going to have more community transmission, meaning that this will be spread without the necessity of travel. And we're seeing that now in most provinces. So this is going to be a reality where businesses or neighbors or people we're in contact with may end up being COVID positive. So in the instance of the question about an office building, one thing we know is that when someone does test positive, our public health system tracks that. So they will go and specifically contact the person who is positive, find out exactly who those contacts are, the workspace, look at the setting, look at the proximity of people working, the type of work that is done, and the public health authorities will actually contact the people that are at close risk, make sure that they arrange to have isolation and testing should it be necessary, and they will make general advice to you about the workspace. It would be rare to see a situation where an office would be completely shut down or the building would be completely shut down. So if you're in a separate office in a building where another office has that, you should not be at risk unless public health advises you as such. So no need to worry about that. I have another question here for you, Karin. I can't sleep for several hours when I go to bed. I'm not really thinking about much, but I still can't sleep. Any tips on how to relax and sleep during this time?
Yes, sleep is one of the first things that goes when we're stressed, and so it's a really good opportunity to review sleep hygiene and see if we can't do a bit of a correction. So there's some mechanical things. Make sure your room is pitch dark. Make sure that all of your electronics are out of the room, because our brain kind of goes, okay, well, I could get a call, I could get a text, I could get something going on. Get the electronics out of the room altogether. You don't want to go to sleep with the TV on, because what happens is that you might think you're going to sleep, and you might think it puts you to sleep, but your brain actually keeps watching the plot of, CSI Miami or whatever's going on. So it's too much, it's too stimulating for your brain to go to sleep. You want to make sure that all the lights are off in your room, and that includes even small lights. We used to just think it was blue lights that actually indicated to your brain that, hey, the sun is coming up over there. Let's give you some adrenaline to wake you up so that you can go and kill a buffalo and start your day, do some hunting gathering, because it's a primitive response, sleep is. It's part of our circadian rhythm. That's part of that primitive part of our brain. Now we know that even little red lights on your power bars, even those things can indicate to your brain that it's morning. You want your room to be cool. You'd like to have fresh air going through if possible. If you have difficulty going to sleep, you might put on I know a lot of people use those Google Homes or Alexas for, hey, Google, play Chopin for 30 minutes and then turn off, and it will do that. And then what you want to do is you want to focus your sensory perception on listening to the sounds, listening to the sounds. If you give your brain something to do, it can't ruminate. So you want to give it something to do, some sensory perception, something to do. If you can also use imagery to get to sleep. Instead, you have control of where your brain goes. So if you go to sleep and thoughts keep coming in, you can actually select. You can deliberately go, okay, you know what? The best time I was on the beach is when I was on Salt Spring Island. My kids were 2 and 4. If I really think about it and visualize, I can actually go use my long-term memory. I can use my senses to go into my long-term memory and recreate that scene in my brain. And I'm going to choose to do that. I'm going to walk down the beach on Salt Spring with my kids. I can smell the seaweed. I can hear them laughing. I can feel the sand under my feet. I can use imagery to put myself in a good place, which stops the worrying thoughts, because the worrying thoughts are going to happen automatically. So if I want to go somewhere else, I have to do it deliberately, but I certainly can. So I'm going to use my sensory perceptions, things that I remember, to get back in my head and to get to sleep. Sometimes people report getting up at 3 in the morning, wide awake. And what we found there is that sometimes, and they report just being completely wide awake. And actually what's kind of interesting is a lot of people are doing fasting things now, and they're doing weird things with their diet. And what happens is if you're not eating from, say, 5 o'clock on, then your brain at 3 in the morning kind of wakes you up. And they've done this with biofeedback and saying, okay, well, people are getting a jolt of adrenaline at 3 in the morning. What is going on here? And it's your brain going, you know, you're running out of calories. You're going to have to go do some hunting gathering here. Go get some food. So your brain actually wakes you up. So you might want to make sure that you've eaten some nuts or something before you go to bed, and that can sometimes, then your body can kind of go, okay, we got enough food to carry us through the night. Something that's not milk, not sugary, not carbs, just something that's high fat, high protein, that's going to take you a long time to carry through. Sometimes even getting your body really cold will help you get to sleep. There are few emotional responses that will overcome your body going, oh my goodness, we're too cold, we're going to abandon anything emotional and warm this body up. I mean, and think about a cold shower. A cold shower is a cold shower for a reason. If we go to bed when we're freezing cold, or if we wake up in the middle of the night, go stand outside, go stand on the porch, take some deep breaths in till you're pretty cold, go back to bed. You probably bought yourself 5 minutes of no rumination while your brain goes, okay, you know what, I'm going to warm this body up here and abandon anything emotional. You can also just even Google sleep hygiene on the internet, and there's a million sites, lots of good things for that. Lots of good apps as well.
Excellent. A number of questions have come in from employers saying, how do we support the mental health of our employees now that they're at home and in isolation or working isolated at home, even though they continue to work? What can employers do to help the mental health of their employees?
Well, and I am hearing that quite a lot from clients. And I think if people had reassurance from you that you expect that their productivity may go down, or that productivity may change, that you're not going to have a meltdown when their kids run through the room or you hear some screaming in the background, that you're going to accommodate the new circumstances as much as possible. I've had loads of people send me notes and go, oh my God, is my employer going to know that I'm not being as productive? How can I corral off my children so that I can be productive? How can I split my brain so I'm doing the two things? You can't. So the more you resist, the less you accept that this is the way it is, the harder it's going to be. We have to have some acceptance that, okay, this is the new world order for the moment. Just let it be. It is what it is. Let it be. If your kids run through the shot, they run through the shot. If you need to be honest with your employees or your employers, I wasn't able to do that, this is what was happening, I would say be honest. Employers are being, I think, as much as possible accommodating and sympathetic. They're in the same situation, they know what's going on. Being as open as possible with your concerns and reassuring your employees that you understand it's not the same.
Great. And along that same lines, how do we, the person at home, working at home, help our children deal with cabin fever and the new reality of a parent working at home?
Well, and this depends on how old your kids are, but this can also be an opportunity to bring in some good family behaviors, like having family meetings if you don't have them. Creating rules of engagement. This is something that works super well as soon as your kids are 5, 6, able to even understand rudimentary rule systems. Putting up a chart on the wall and going, okay, this is the rules for the family, this is the rules for the household, and these are the consequences if we don't follow the rules. Kids, just like adults, don't like injustice. They don't like hypocrisy. They notice when things aren't fair. So as much as we get things on the table and say, okay, this is the way it has to work here. This is what happens if it doesn't work this way. And everybody signs off and agrees. Creating rules of engagement can be a really good way to get everybody on the same page. And then when somebody breaks the rules, then all you have to do is point to the chart. I'm not going to nag, I'm just going to point to the chart. They've agreed to this, they know what the consequence is, that's it. Reward works better than punishment. So if you're really quiet, well, mommy, if you color this while mommy's on her meeting between 9 and 10 until the big hand hits the top of the clock, you get the iPad for an hour. So reward works better than punishment, putting in some good rules. I know that there's going to be an impulse to give in when your kids have some bad behavior and, violate the rules. The problem is if you give in, you've just reinforced the bad behavior. So as much as short-term pain means that you stick to the rules, that you don't violate them. So if you say 2 hours of iPad, it's 2 hours of iPad, period. If you let them, if they whine and you let them go, okay, take another half hour, all you've taught them is, hey, guess what? If I whine and have a temper tantrum, mom's going to give in. So you want to stick to the rules, absolutely. It's going to seem hard in the short term, but ultimately, if the negative behavior isn't reinforced, they will ultimately stick to the rules. So as much as possible, do that.
Excellent. A couple of questions that have come in medically as well. One is about Wello specifically. How can Wello support people that are out of town or even in town at their work camps or in employee sites? How can Wello play a role? And Wello is, as you know, a virtual platform to deliver primary medical care for what can be dealt with by telemedicine. So one thing that we're finding, and I think we will see over the next few months in particular, a huge increase in telemedicine delivery of medical services. And this is because many of the things that we're dealing with, we can, through a good history, through a video visit, we can see how people are looking, we can even examine certain things by a video. We can do a lot to help prevent people from leaving their homes to access medical care. In this time, we're all hearing about stay home if you can. We don't want people sitting in crowded waiting rooms. We don't want people having to go out of their homes. So we want to bring medical care to you, whether you're off-site in a remote work camp, whether you're isolated at home. Telemedicine services like our Wello can certainly bring medical care without leaving the home. So that is how that can help. I have another question for you, Karin, as well. If we're looking at this current situation, what type of long-term psychological harm can this pandemic cause for people? Are you concerned, or could there be development of PTSD down the road?
Yes, unless we mitigate it with some good behaviors and know what's going on and not suppress things and deal with things kind of as they go along. So I would say when we're thinking about will this cause long-term behavioral things, I do worry with some of my clients who have anxiety. So what one of my clients said to me who has anxiety, see, I told you we should be staying in, we shouldn't be socializing, this is exactly what I've told you, you keep pushing me to go out and socialize and do things, and now here, look what's happened. See, this reinforces my anxious behavior. And I would say more than anything, that's what I worry about. I worry about people who already have a predisposition for anxious behavior, to stay at home, to withdraw, to, when stress goes up, then I'm not going to be in touch with my friends, I'm going to cancel a bunch of things, I'm going to stay home as much as possible, that they're going to think that that is actually the behavior that gets reinforced. And really, ultimately, in the long term, we still want to move through that. And I would say, if anything, that would be the long-term thing that I worry about the most. In terms of PTSD, yes, all sorts of things can cause PTSD. So yes, generally speaking, it's because it's triggering something else and bringing something else to the surface. So sometimes when we're stressed about this, assaults, divorces, situations that have traumatic that have happened previously in our life can come to the fore. And so I think you've really got to be careful and pay attention to your body. Most psychologists are doing telehealth at this point. If there was ever a time to see a psychologist, this would be the time to start to make sense of some of those feelings that are coming out that might be disproportionate to what's going on right now, because it might not be about what's going on right now. In fact, it probably isn't. It's probably about other stuff that's coming out. So PTSD, yes, and with PTSD, the thing that we know defeats it more than anything is awareness, knowing when you go in to a stressful situation that this is a potential for response. How do I mitigate this? Self-care, self-care, self-care. Your body is the thing that's going to carry you through this journey. Even though we think our brain is the thing that, mental health, it's all about our brain, this body is the thing that's going to carry you through. So make sure you're eating well, make sure you're sleeping well, make sure you're hydrated, make sure you're doing exercise. If you do those things, you're probably best able to mitigate a spike in a stressful response.
Absolutely, and that actually has a lead into another question: is how do I strengthen my immune system? And we all know that when we're under chronic stress, and we have that fight or flight for urgent needs, but when this becomes long-standing, this is chronic, our cortisol levels go up. There's a number of things that take place in our body that can actually reduce our ability, our immune system, or our response to infection. So it's really important that those principles are managed, that you're really doing good self-care during this time. And hopefully, as people are now spending more time at home, they can actually do a little more of that self-care that they may not have had time to do as they were racing around doing errands, etc. This is a time to really focus on your health, your family's health, and your own self-care. I've had a couple of questions come in, very similar, but talking about packaging, for example, things that are delivered to you, whether it's a package, a newspaper, packages that arrive, or touching packaging in a store. And we know that the COVID virus, it transmits, it's a droplet carried infection, meaning that in respiratory secretions, if somebody coughs or sneezes, that particle carries. Well, if somebody coughs or sneezes and perhaps touches their hand as they cough or sneeze, and then they touch something, we know the virus can live outside of the body. It replicates inside the body, but it can live for periods of time outside the body. And we don't have firm and fast peer-reviewed studies yet to tell us, but we're getting indications that it can live on different surfaces, different amounts of time. So we know that on paper, such as packages, newspapers, magazines, anything that we handle that is perhaps paper-based, it may live up to 24 hours. So some of the best practices then would be, if you're bringing home a package, or say now we've ordered a takeout food that's delivered, if we can take the packaging, open it, remove whatever item we're dealing with, and put it in our own dishes or reservoirs that we're holding it, and then carefully, wash your hands afterwards before you handle the food or whatever package you've opened. So that would be a best practice. Obviously, wearing gloves and as you're handling things can also be a best practice. When you remove the gloves, make sure you hand wash well and then eliminate the packaging. So we also know that it's very important to continue washing your hands, because if you do inadvertently touch something, whether it's a doorknob or a grocery cart, whatever it may be, wherever we are, we may transfer that onto our hands. So constant hand washing, because we don't know when we've had that exposure, would be good once you've handled things or been in a public situation. I know there's a strong recommendation as well not to touch our face, and the reason for that is because that virus comes into our bodies through our mouths, our nose, or the conjunctiva, the area of the surface of our eyes. So obviously those are all on our face, so the recommendation is if we can avoid touching our face, and we inadvertently do that many times in the day, that's where the hand washing advisory comes in as well. So I have another question, Karin, for you. What about coping techniques for dealing with people who are not self-isolated? So we're self-isolated, but our friend is not.
You can't change somebody else's behavior, and if people are entrenched in this belief that they're skeptical, or that it's, whatever, you can say in the most positive way, our family is doing this for protection, and so I understand, and it's your right to do whatever you want and to participate with me and my family in my environment. This is what I've chosen, and so you're not able just to not include them in your immediate area. You can say it in the most positive way. When people are responding like that, it's usually out of fear, right? I mean, if people are really, I'm going to do this anyway, and I'm going to go out anyway, and I'm going to be, it's usually because it's usually a fear response. And so you might want to reassure them and go, yeah, this is really scary. This is a completely unknown thing. We don't know what's going on. And so, you know what, our family, for what we've decided, is that we've decided that we're going to go with this protocol. We're going to go with what experts are saying, and that's what we're going to do. I respect your decision. However, you can't be included in my life, in my vicinity for the time being. You can't persuade them. I guess what I'm saying is, don't persuade them, because you know what's going to happen? Once your fight or flight goes up, their fight or flight goes up, and communication only happens prefrontal cortex to prefrontal cortex. So if you're not calm, and if they're not calm, then whatever conversation you have isn't going to be positive. So if that person is, defensive and they're going to do this, if you reflect a really calm, exterior, you're 50% of that transaction, and people will mirror other people. So if you're remaining calm, then they're more likely to calm down. And if they're calm, they're more likely to hear what you're saying than if you go, well, that's just stupid. Then they're not going to hear anything. You're not going to hear anything. No communication is going to happen. There's no point. So mirror a calm exterior. If they want information, give them information. Otherwise, stick to your boundaries.
Perfect. I have another medical question that came in. Somebody saying, what if I have mild flu-like symptoms that have been lingering, or even new symptoms that have come in? And we know that even though we have a COVID pandemic out there, we still are getting some of the normal cold, cough, flu viruses, asthma reactivities, bronchitis. These things are still out in the community. But we are now being advised by our public health authorities that whatever happens, whether it's a cold, a cough, even if you think it's your usual bronchitis that you get every year, it's very important to stay home and self-isolate. And the guidelines that they're changing every couple of days. So what we say today may be different tomorrow or next week, but the current thoughts are now, with any symptoms whatsoever, cold, flu, any symptoms that perhaps are not severe and you would have carried about your day, now please stay home and self-isolate for 10 days. And if in 10 days time, even if your symptoms are better in 2 or 3 days, we want you home for 10 days in order to really make sure we're controlling the spread of this. If you still have symptoms at the 10 days time, you continue to self-isolate until those symptoms have gone. So that's all the time I know there are many other questions we didn't get to, but we're certainly happy through our Wello service to help you with any questions that you may continue to have, or medical concerns that you have. We have our team there. There was a question about our turnaround time, and we've been very lucky over the past year or two to be able to always say we can get to you within 20 minutes, but our demand is quite high now. We're doing our very best to get to you as soon as possible. So I'd really like to thank everybody for attending today. I hope, thank you, Karin, for some excellent information. I want to reinforce that it really is a trying time and unknown times for so many right now, and we all will pull through this together. It's important to follow our public health advisories through this time, and there are many things on the internet, but our source of truth really is the public health websites for each province. If you go to canada.ca, it can guide you to each province. But everything we do as individuals will make a difference. Every person makes a difference. So nobody, whether you're young, old, infected, not infected, it's really important that we all follow these directives and help control the spread. We've heard about flattening the curve, and we really do need to do that, because if we have a surge and a big peak, we can get into a situation where hospital resources are scarce, and we never want to reach that stage. So stay home if you can. Don't go out for non-essential services. If you do go out, follow that 6-foot physical distancing, that social distancing that is being talked about. If you are ill, even if it's minor, stay home. If it's respiratory, use that hand cough hygiene and wash your hands regularly. So Thank you so much for being with us today. We're going to continue our webinar series, so stay posted for new topics. Thanks very much.
Thank you.